Back in April, Bayern Munich were playing a game and losing.
Und dann Nico Feldhan, was macht der denn? Kühlwetter dazwischen, Kühlwetter mit dem 1:0 für den 1. FC Kaiserslautern.
If that wasn't already remarkable enough, that 1-0 loss to Kaiserslautern was actually enough to see them win the league title.
1:0 mussten hoffen, dass Braunschweig und Würzburg nicht gewinnen und die taten ihnen den Gefallen. Die Bayern, trotz Niederlage, blieben sie auf Platz 1 und kurz drauf.
As you might have guessed, this was not Hansi Flick's Bayern Munich, but Sebastien Hoeness Bayern Munich Zwei, Bayern's B team. But having won the Dritte Liga, Bayern Zwei had got as high as they could go. Even Bayern's reserves had become uncompetitive. Over in England, the debate over B teams rages on.
You know, we've spoken to the Premier League teams at length. The majority of those have said they support the idea of B teams, you know, because competition is the key. You've got to get 18 to 21-year-olds playing in a competitive environment where it means something.
With coronavirus pushing the football pyramid to the limit, solutions to the problems of English football are rife. The call for B teams is back. In this episode we ask, are B teams really the solution to English football's problems?
Are B teams the answer to the problems in English football? For me, it's a no. For thousands of football fans around the country, it's a no.
James Cave is the co-founder of Against League 3, a media channel that raises awareness on lower league issues.
You have to ask, what are the real problems with English football? Wages are out of control, fans have been priced out of the game, there's a lack of supportive representation at pretty much all levels. B teams don't address any of that, they just hand more power to the already powerful.
So why is it that B teams are back in the news at the moment?
With coronavirus, the conversations surrounding financial support have been really deeply divided. Should it be the Premier League to provide financial support to clubs who can't have fans, or should it be the government? And while government support looks increasingly unlikely, it's probably the Premier League who will have to provide a bailout to the professional game. And last week at a sporting leaders conference, Manchester City Chief Executive Ferran Soriano discussed, and to quote, "The challenges of developing players in England where B teams are not allowed." He bemoaned a development gap for elite youngsters aged 17 to 18, that clubs were struggling to find playing time for youngsters at that age, and they're often being taken by overseas clubs. Quote, "They're taken from us by the German teams who tried to sell them back to us for a price which is 10 times they paid." The next line I think is really telling about, the mentality of Premier League clubs. He said this is something we needed to solve, and now maybe the crisis will give us an opportunity and will nudge us together to solve these issues. But in addition, he said one of the challenges is that the EFL as a business is not sustainable enough. And the implication of what he said is that if the Premier League was to be the ones to provide a financial bailout, then B teams in the league would likely be one of the requirements.
So help me get this straight. The argument is that the EFL's business model is not sustainable enough. How would B teams solve the problem of this lack of sustainability?
Well, they wouldn't. I'd argue the opposite would apply. B teams make the EFL less sustainable. You think of sustainability as the EFL's ability and any individual club's ability to be financially independent and solvent. B teams essentially would make the league and the individual clubs more reliant on income from the Premier League, and that significantly reduces the sustainability of the EFL. In an ideal world, you would have clubs wean themselves off parachute payments and attempt to survive without any financial support from the Premier League. But Soriano does have a point when he says that the model is not sustainable enough. Obviously, some clubs are more financially responsible than others, but generally the bottom line is the EFL clubs spend far too much on wages while trying to compete. And it's a vicious circle. If you're the chairman of a top half League One club, do you spend within your means and end up maybe mid-table for the season, or do you take a risk? Do you increase the budget slightly and try and earn promotion? And that situation is 10 times worse in the Championship. The often cited statistic is that several years ago you had clubs spending around 107% of their turnover on wages. And in that instance, Soriano is right, that clearly isn't sustainable. But the measures that he wants to introduce have nothing to do with sustainability of the EFL and its clubs.
So what is this really about then?
It's about success and power for the Premier League clubs. B teams allow Premier League clubs to justify and play their increased sized squads. With the increased commercialisation of the game, youth academies are huge earners now for the top clubs. With EPPP, the Elite Player Performance Plan, elite clubs can cherry pick players from lower clubs for a fraction of their true worth, develop the players for several years, and often make a significant profit. In response, my argument is that while it's perfectly fair for elite clubs to have youth squads, they can only play so many players. They're essentially trapping players that they can't play. And that to me means they should be sold, they should be released, or they should never have been acquired in the first place. If development by playing in the EFL is so efficient, then the players not receiving game time would likely be in and around the first teams of EFL clubs anyway if they were available. In reality, B teams in the EFL would be hugely profitable for elite clubs. Years of honing the developmental process means that clubs are understandably very good at generating world-class players, but if they can increase the quantity of players being produced and sold, that's obviously extremely lucrative financially.
B teams are a phenomenon that have been around for years. They're commonplace in Spain and Germany, for example. Could you just give us a brief history of how B teams have functioned in English football?
So in England there has been and still are instances of something you can class as B teams in football, but in a very limited capacity. At the very bottom level, it's not uncommon for your local Saturday or Sunday side to have a reserve team in the local league division down. Now that's fine to a point. These are amateur teams looking to field players who often pay the clubs themselves rather than be paid. In local county cup competitions, it's not uncommon for elite clubs to field a youth squad within the competition. They play pre-season friendlies against non-league clubs, lower league clubs. And the attendance at these games has always been historically pretty poor, as was the case in the old, now scrapped reserve leagues. But with regards to the pressure for implementation of B teams, this started to develop from around maybe 2010. You know, English clubs you have looking on at envy towards Germany and Spain, incredibly successful national teams. They have B teams in the league that are incredible at developing players. And the campaigning for the implementation of those teams has increased over time, both privately and publicly. And then 2014 was the real watershed.
That was the moment at which Greg Dyke first suggested the creation of a new League 3, combining the top half of the conference and 10 Premier League B-sides as part of his England commission. This was obviously the point at which you decided to form against League 3. Can you tell us about your reasoning for starting this venture?
Since I was 14 years old, it's not exaggerating to say that my life revolved around Southport Football Club. That's where I'm from, that's where I was born. I've never lived more than a mile away from the stadium, really. The people there were my friends and family. I've been part of the media team. They taught me how to build websites, photography, videography, writing. I met my wife there. And so much of my life now has either directly or indirectly come from my experiences at the football club. And one day I'm at my day job, I'm on a break, I'm smoking a cigarette, I'm flicking through Twitter. I see this plan from the FA, League 3, a plan to reorganise the football pyramid and introduce a number of Premier League B teams into the Football League. And in my opinion, for a club like Southport, that was a devastating idea. It would mean the erosion of genuine sporting competition. You'd be competing against academies with an annual spend of up to tens of millions of pounds. The pre-season games that we'd had, so Southport would regularly play Everton and Liverpool youth sides in pre-season. They were terrible games. They were dull, they were boring, no one came. Why should the league be a training ground for Premier League clubs? And all I did at the time was start a Twitter account. I never had any plans to be a prominent campaigner on the issue. I just planned to maybe cover how it was going, post a link to the odd petition if there was one. And at the time, a Grimsby fan by the name of Lewis Horwell, really good guy, he'd started a petition on the same day. I think it ended up with about 34,000 signatures. We'd had a chat on the same day. We started the website, and that was how Against League 3 was started.
I think it's a good idea for the Premier League B teams to enter St Johnstone's Paint Trophy because I think when they're playing against other 21s, they don't have as much competition as they do against other teams.
Since 2014, we've seen the introduction of B teams in the Johnston Paint Trophy, which has now become the EFL Trophy. How would you say that experiment with B teams has gone down in the last half decade or so?
Pretty terribly. Of course I'd say that given the campaign I run, but there's plenty of supporting evidence. The main one would be attendances. Later stages can get skewed, particularly by the final, but to compare the first round group stage attendances, the first year saw average attendances fall to, I think it was less than half. Second year they were up slightly but fell overall because two smaller teams made the final. Of course that's possibly because the boycott, which against League 3 essentially organised and coordinated. I remember at the time I was really reluctant to get involved with something like that. I really didn't want to be the guy telling people not to watch their football club. But the requests, demands even maybe, that we organised a boycott came flooding in. The trophy it's eroded trust between supporters and the Football League. It's eroded trust between supporters and the clubs who voted for it. I still haven't seen the huge numbers of youth coming through the competition that was slated when it was designed. By the second year, the EFL had to financially support clubs for hosting the games. The rules were changed and clubs were compensated essentially for hosting these games. This trophy was meant to be reinvigorated, was the word that the EFL used. It was the total opposite of that. I'd argue that the competition has been an absolute disaster and sadly shows no signs of being changed anywhere in the near future.
So what would you say are the pitfalls that you see in including Premier League B teams in the football pyramid?
We get told with, almost alarming regularity that for many fans it would be the end of their involvement with football, and that sounds really dramatic and really drastic, but it shows how serious the concerns of supporters are on this issue. For a start, it increases dependence on the Premier League, and going back to what I was saying about sustainability before, is a bad thing generally. I think clubs can expect lower attendances, ergo their income would drop. I think it erodes the history of the club and the league. The EFL clubs are often hundreds of years old and have been competing on a generally even keel for all of that time. And I think to get rid of that, to support the Premier League in what is essentially commercially based youth development is absolutely abhorrent. One of Against League 3's big issues is a general lack of supporter consultation. Supporters have never been asked whether they want these measures. No, of course, that's probably because the answer would be a resounding no. But generally, there's so many things you could point to into why it's such a terrible idea. They are the general ones, but essentially, why should supporters of EFL clubs themselves have to tolerate their league being used as a training ground? Premier League clubs already have so many avenues to develop youth players. The elite clubs are operating on turnovers of over £100 million. They're spending tens of millions of pounds on youth development a year. They're pretty much all upgrading their training grounds recently. All of them are making a sustained effort to upgrade their academies. It just isn't necessary. But the problem is that the clubs are trying to acquire players that they have no room to play. And to try and shoehorn that into a league that's hundreds of years old, to me, is just unacceptable.
In a piece in the Set Pieces from 2016, Ian McIntosh wrote, quote, "The motivation for this is simple. It is greed. You have proved too feckless and incompetent to manage your resources. You have scooped up so many youngsters that you don't know what to do with them. You stockpile them and they stagnate and you don't know what to do. And so once again you seek to squeeze the life out of us for a marginal gain on your balance sheet." Do you agree with what Ian McIntosh says there?
Wholeheartedly, without issue, without a single contention. The piece in its entirety is one that I'm very familiar with. It's an excellent piece from a very good journalist on a very good publication. When we're campaigning, it's very easy to get tied down in the practicalities of it. When I'm making an argument on Twitter or I'm writing an article for a website or whatever, it's easy to list off fact after fact. But what that piece does, and it's so good, I'd encourage anyone to go and find it and read it. It's humorous, but it puts the emotion back into it as well. It really kind of captures why that's important to someone who goes to go and watch their terrible non-league club on a Saturday or their terrible EFL club. It goes some way to demonstrating why something on the face of it, without logic, is so terrible, is so important to people. It's a fabulous piece, and I agree with it wholeheartedly.
Okay, so Sam Wallace of The Telegraph has broken a huge story recently about a proposal to significantly change English football.
This is a groundbreaking proposal. It is probably the most, well, it is the most revolutionary, transformative changes that have been proposed to the Premier League since its inception.
Yesterday we saw details of Project Big Picture, a plan for the future governance of English football, being leaked by the Telegraph newspaper. Do you think that this Project Big Picture is just B teams by another name?
No, I don't think it is, but it would certainly be one way of implementing B teams. The issues surrounding Project Big Picture are much, much larger. To me, it's essentially a power grab from the Big Nine or the Big Six, or however you want to look at it. The way that the voting changes in the Premier League, if these plans are implemented, is absolutely massive. It's absolutely huge and would allow them to do so much more than just implement B teams. It would certainly make the creation of B teams and putting them in the league incredibly easy, but the plans would allow them to do so much more. I personally don't think the plans will ever see the light of day. I think there's going to be too much opposition to them from within inside the FA, from EFL club owners, from lower Premier League clubs. I would be very, very surprised if in its current format that these plans ever came in. It's certainly an interesting indication of the mentality of the elite level clubs. The commercial incentives to lower divisions in that plan are actually particularly appealing, don't get me wrong. There's actually some really nice measures in there, and there's actually some really helpful measures that some campaigners have called for years. But the price of those measures is much, much too high. You can't afford to give so much control to the very top elite clubs in the Premier League. It's just unacceptable.
So do you see the introduction of B teams into the English football pyramid as inevitable in the end?
No, I don't. But the pressure is only going to increase. One of the main solutions to keeping them out of the league is that fans are going to have to greatly increase their levels of organisation and, perhaps uncomfortably, their levels of militancy. One of the reasons why Against League 3 has been semi-successful in raising the issue, in combating the FA's 2014 plans, was essentially militancy and the readiness to confront the plans quite vocally in a way that was quite uncomfortable for some governing bodies and some leagues. I think to avoid B teams being implemented is going to mean if you live in London and there's a protest in Manchester, you won't get a thanks for it, but get on the train and go and do it. You know, the pressure's going to increase as youth development becomes increasingly more profitable, more so than it already is. The other reason why it's not 100% inevitable is thankfully a lot of the EFL club owners and club chairmen are against it. To implement the teams in the league without the support of those owners is going to be very difficult, if not impossible. However, those EFL club owners have shown that they can be malleable to financial incentive. So overall, no, I don't think it's fully inevitable, but I think the plans and pressure will continue to be applied over the next couple of years.
Are you a fan of Football Today? Why not support the show and sign up to our new Patreon page? You'll get access to bonus episodes, full and unedited interviews, and lots more extra content. To join us, just visit patreon.com and search for Football Today. Now back to today's episode. Whenever debates over B teams bubble up into the public sphere, you can always expect to hear mention of Germany or Spain, two countries where B teams have been allowed into the football pyramids. I spoke to Matt Ford, a freelance journalist who covers German football and fan culture for DW Sports and others, to see how successful the B team experiment has been in Germany.
From a purely footballing perspective, a B team can make sporting sense, just ask Bayern Munich about the development of some of their younger players. But for the smaller clubs that they have to play against lower down the pyramid, B teams can create all sorts of problems, from gate receipts to matchday planning to potential distortion of the competition, not to mention the fan culture.
So last season saw Bayern Munich 2 win the Dritte Liga. Given they can't promote any higher than the third division of German football, they're going to stay in that league. What does it tell us that even Bayern's second team has become uncompetitive in German football?
Well, on the face of it, Bayern Munich's reserves marching straight to a third division title just a year after winning promotion from Division 4. Let's not forget that. On the face of it, that's not a good look. But I think the context is important, and I think this season in particular has to be taken with a pinch of salt. Bayern were 7th in Division 3 in Germany before the coronavirus hiatus, and they weren't really going anywhere. It was only after the restart, however, that they only lost 2 games as they marched up the league and secured the third division title. Now, that suggests that the professional environment, the facilities, the training, the preparations that those players had at Bayern's new professional campus in Munich were advantageous compared to the circumstances which other players, other teams were dealing with when it came to training and preparation, especially under coronavirus conditions.
So who benefits from Bayern Munich 2 being in the German pyramid?
Last season, it was probably Eintracht Braunschweig who ended up gaining automatic promotion to Division 2 when otherwise, having finished third, they would have had to go into a relegation promotion playoff, whether they managed to go up automatically. So they were probably quite happy with that in the end. Generally speaking, however, the biggest beneficiaries of Bayern Munich's reserve team playing in the professional pyramids are inevitably Bayern Munich.
So how many Bayern starters or squad players in recent seasons have actually played minutes in their B team?
Well, in Bayern Munich's case, there's actually a great deal of overlap between the first team squad and the reserves. Last season, 9 reserve team players were considered good enough to be listed in Bayern Munich's Bundesliga squad on at least one occasion. Dutch teenage striker Joshua Zirkzee, he's only 19, he made the biggest impact.
18-year-old Joshua Zirkzee, who made his debut as a late sub in the Champions League last week, is on 4 additional minutes. Perisic. Oh, and it's come here for Zirkzee! Would you believe it?
Scored 4 important goals for the first team and effectively acted as a replacement for Robert Lewandowski. And in terms of the first team squad, Bayern have still failed or declined to find a direct replacement for Lewandowski. So being able to fall back on Joshua Zirkzee from the reserves was certainly a positive for them. As far as the players themselves are concerned, it can be a very useful stepping stone, both in terms of gaining professional experience and in terms of match fitness. So take Jan-Fiete Arp, for example, considered one of Germany's hottest prospects when he joined Bayern from Hamburg in 2019. He recovered from a broken wrist last season, but made 12 reserve team appearances. So having the opportunity for him to come back from an injury at that level was an important stepping stone when perhaps he wasn't quite at the level of fitness to go straight into Bundesliga games. Slightly differently, Michael Cuisance, who was recently linked with Leeds United, he was struggling for game time at Bayern Munich despite them paying €12 million for him from Borussia Mönchengladbach. However, dropping down into the third division to play games there, that wasn't quite as big a drop down as, say, dropping down into the regional leagues. So even when he wasn't breaking into the first team, there was still a professional level for him to play at.
And have the players themselves remarked on the experience being positive of playing for the second team?
You tend to hear very little from the players themselves, it must be said. A lot of that will be down to the fact that even at under 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, under 23 level at Bayern Munich, they don't just benefit from the high-level professional training and development that you would expect of a professional club. They also benefit from the media training, which a club like Bayern Munich inevitably provides their players. So you tend to hear very little from the younger players themselves. But when you consider that Joshua Zirkzee, as well as scoring 4 goals in the Bundesliga, he also started 10 games in Division 3 for the reserves, scoring 2 goals. He probably enjoyed having the opportunity to switch between the two, and you can understand why other clubs in the third division might consider that to be a bit of a problem, because obviously they can't just cherry-pick Bundesliga players when they need to.
I think one thing that we're being told in England at the moment is that the introduction of B teams into the pyramid is going to offer some kind of solution to the financial problems faced by lower league sides in the country. Do you think that the German model bears this out?
If anything, I think the opposite is true. Just like in England, the further down the pyramid you go, the more reliant clubs become on gate receipts, and that includes especially the away followings, and especially in Germany. Bundesliga reserve teams in Division 3 or further down in the regional leagues in Division 4, they don't tend to bring a large number of away fans, certainly not if the first team is playing simultaneously or even on the same day. Take the Regionalliga West, for example, so the regional league in the west of Germany. It features the reserve teams of Borussia Mönchengladbach, Borussia Dortmund, Schalke, Fortuna Düsseldorf and Cologne. Now, for the likes of fallen giants such as Rot-Weiß Essen or Preußen Münster or Alemannia Aachen, that's potentially 5 home games with no away fans, and that's a lot of money.
And it's not as if this is benefiting all of the elite sides in Germany as well, because you pointed out in a piece for DW Sport recently that the maintenance of a professional team in the third tier costs between 4 and 8 million euros, the sort of money that smaller Bundesliga clubs don't have lying around. There are a dozen Bundesliga reserve teams across the regional fourth tier who have little chance of promotion, and several Bundesliga clubs, including Bayer Leverkusen and Eintracht Frankfurt, have scrapped their reserve teams, preferring to send young players out on loan. So it seems as though it's only really the Bayerns and the Dortmunds of this world who are really set to win from this system. Would you agree with that?
If the aim of a reserve team is to provide genuine backup for the first team in the Bundesliga, it would seem that a lot of Bundesliga clubs have actually come to the conclusion that it's only seriously worth investing in if that reserve team is in the third division, so in a professional nationwide league. The 5 regional divisions which make up the fourth tier are only semi-professional, so the gap is simply too big. The benefit is simply not there for Bundesliga level players to either drop down and gain match fitness at that level, or the other way around for younger players to make the step up from Division 4 to Division 1. This was particularly the case for Bayern Munich, where the Bavarian regional league, i.e. where Munich-based teams would play, is probably the weakest of the 5 regional leagues. On the other hand, the Regional League West, where Dortmund, Cologne, Mönchengladbach are, is probably one of the strongest of the regional leagues, along with the Northeast, and that goes some way to explaining the continued presence of 5 Bundesliga B teams in that division, whereas Bayern Munich have taken the decision to invest the money and get their reserve team out of that regional league, which is simply too weak.
How do German football fans feel about the B team system? Is there any pushback from the fans?
Generally speaking, as you can probably imagine, B teams are unpopular. German football lives and breathes through its real life, match-going fan culture and everything that a match day entails. But for fans of big traditional clubs like, let's take the Northeast, for example, Energie Cottbus, Lokomotive Leipzig, Carl Zeiss Jena, for those fans it can be quite difficult to get excited about a home game against Hertha Berlin's reserves. However, there is still an interesting counter-argument, and this is particularly the case at Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund, where there are not an insignificant number of hardcore supporters who actually prefer to watch the reserves. Borussia Dortmund's under-23s, a team they refer to as the amateurs or the Amateure, they even have their own dedicated ultras. Now, it might seem a bit bizarre. Why would fans of Dortmund or Bayern Munich prefer to watch Division 3 or Division 4 semi-pro football when their club plays in the Champions League? But for many of them who go home and away and all around Europe watching their teams, watching the reserves provides a bit of an antidote to what they consider the over-commercialised beast of modern football. No scramble for expensive tickets, no overzealous policing, and they think that the dynamic between the players and the fans is completely different. The fans feel closer to the younger players. The younger players appreciate the support genuinely, and I think it's a lot more relatable. And finally, the chance to play against big traditional clubs like Kaiserslautern, like Hansa Rostock, like 1860 Munich, the chance to go to those stadiums and those cities is, for some, a lot more interesting than going to the pre-zero arena in Hoffenheim every year.
Do you think the B-team system is here to stay in Germany?
At the moment, there are no plans to scrap B teams. I think there are other issues in the structuring of German football which are high up the agenda, including the restructuring of the regional fourth tier or the endless debate over the promotion relegation playoffs. So there's no plans to scrap the B team system. However, every now and again, including recently, you do get the suggestion to allow B teams to go higher than Division 3. This argument was made most recently by Herbert Hainer. He's the new president of Bayern Munich. Obviously, it's in his interest. He's just watched the reserve team at his club win the third division and they weren't allowed to go up. Equally predictably, that suggestion was met with quite a lot of resistance, especially from teams in the second division who would quite obviously see their own position in the second division directly threatened by a team potentially benefiting from stronger financial backing.
So, are B teams the answer to the problems in English football?
In English football, I tend to think that the ship has already sailed and that there are probably bigger issues at stake than simply B teams and whether or not they should be allowed. The entire footballing system across Europe is already weighted in favour of a small number of elite teams at the top, and nowhere more so than in England and at the top of the Premier League. Indeed, these recent reform suggestions from Manchester United and from Liverpool show exactly in which direction that's going. Rest assured, the authors of that report will probably be more than happy to see Manchester United or Liverpool B teams playing as high up the professional pyramid as possible, because they stand to benefit directly from that. But as we see in Germany, the regular clubs who then have to compete against these teams, they suffer on several levels, whether it's financial, whether it's in terms of planning from week to week, or whether it's simply in terms of distortion of the competition.
James Cave is the co-founder of Against League 3, a media channel that raises awareness on lower league issues. You can find Matt Ford's freelance journalism at DW Sports and elsewhere. The music for this episode was provided under the Creative Commons license by Blue Dot Sessions, and the details of the individual songs can be found in the show notes. This episode was produced by Josh Schneiderweiler. I'm John Mackenzie. Thanks for listening to Football Today.